When people speak about family, they usually describe it as a place of safety, of unconditional love, a space where one can be entirely themselves. But sometimes, behind the walls of a home, family can take on a much darker shape. This story begins with a young girl named Aisha, who discovered very early in life that not every home was built on kindness. And yet, as she grew older, she also learned that pain, when carried silently, could be turned into the most unexpected form of strength. Aisha was 8 years old when her world changed. She had grown up in a modest but warm household with her father and her mother. Her father, Imran, was a man respected in the community, disciplined, hardworking, but soft-spoken. He worked as a government clerk, not earning much, but just enough to give his family a steady life. Her mother, Safia, was gentle and patient, the sort of woman who poured her energy into her home and into her daughter's small joys. Aisha remembered evenings spent listening to her mother humming old songs in the kitchen while her father read the newspaper. The soft smell of lentils cooking on the stove filling the little house. But life has a way of changing suddenly, without warning. When Aisha was only 8, her mother fell seriously ill. At first it was thought to be something small, weakness, fatigue, but within months it became clear that she was not going to recover. Aisha still remembered the endless hospital visits, the pale face of her mother lying in bed, and the helpless look in her father's eyes. And then, just like that, she was gone. The house that once echoed with laughter and warmth fell into silence. Imran was devastated. He was not an expressive man, but his grief showed in the way he grew quieter, almost mechanical. For Aisha, losing her mother was like losing the sun. The world still existed, but it felt colder, dimmer. She clung to her father, the only parent she had left. And in those early days after Safia's passing, he clung back. For a short while, they seemed to share their grief together. But as months turned into a year, things began to shift. Relatives, neighbors, even friends from the office whispered in Imran's ear, "You should remarry. You need someone to look after the house. The girl is still young. She needs a mother." At first he resisted, but pressure has a way of wearing a man down, and eventually he agreed. This is when Shabana entered their lives. Shabana was everything that Safia had not been. Where Safia had been soft and warm, Shabana was sharp, ambitious, and unyielding. She was in her mid-30s, with carefully maintained looks and a certain air of pride about her. Imran had been introduced to her through family connections. She had been divorced once, and there were whispers about why her first marriage had failed, though no one said much directly. For Imran, who was lonely and weary, Shabana seemed like a solution to a problem. She was practical, outspoken, and promised to run the house properly. At first, Aisha, now 9, tried to accept her. After all, she had been told again and again that this was for her own good, that every child needed a mother. But within days of Shabana moving in, the little girl began to feel the sharp edges of her presence. Shabana was not openly cruel in front of Imran. She was clever enough for that. Around him, she played the role of the attentive wife, occasionally scolding Aisha in small ways, but never in a way that seemed out of line. But when Imran was away at work, which was most of the day, the house became a very different place. It began with small things. The food served to Aisha was always a little less than what others got. If there were 2 pieces of chicken, Shabana made sure one was kept aside for herself or for guests, while the child was given only rice and gravy. If Aisha spoke too loudly, she was scolded harshly. If she sat in the living room watching television, Shabana would order her to leave, saying children had no right to take up space. Slowly, the house that had once been her safe place became a place where she felt like an intruder. Imran never noticed. Or perhaps he chose not to notice. He was already weighed down by his own grief, his work, and the relief of having someone else take care of household responsibilities. Shabana knew exactly how to behave when he was home, sweet, even indulgent. She would put her arm around Aisha, asking, "Did you do your homework? Show me, beta." But the moment the door closed behind him in the morning, her mask slipped away. By the time Aisha was 10, she had already learned to keep quiet, to lower her eyes, to hide her small joys so they would not be taken from her. She became careful, cautious. Children at that age usually speak freely, run without fear, laugh without hesitation. But Aisha's laughter became rare. She became observant instead, noticing details about people, the way their tone changed depending on who was in the room, the way Shabana smiled in front of her father, but hissed insults when he wasn't looking. The cruelty was subtle, but constant. If Aisha left her shoes slightly out of place, she was scolded for being lazy. If she forgot to close a door, she was punished by being given extra chores. On one occasion, she accidentally spilled a glass of water, and Shabana made her mop the entire kitchen floor, scolding her for being clumsy. It was never anything extreme enough that she could go running to her father and be believed. And that was the brilliance of Shabana's cruelty. It was measured, calculated, always just enough to hurt, never enough to expose. Years went by in this quiet torment. Aisha grew into adolescence, carrying her silence like armor. She became an excellent student, not because anyone encouraged her, but because books were her only escape. When she sat with her schoolwork, she could forget for a moment the heaviness of the house. Teachers praised her intelligence, but at home, her achievements were dismissed as nothing special. If she scored first in her class, Shabana would sneer and say, "So what?" Many children do. Don't get proud of yourself. The more Aisha succeeded, the more Shabana seemed unsettled. It was as though the woman could not bear to see the girl shine in any way. By the time Aisha turned 16, she had learned not to share her victories at home. She kept them to herself, quietly holding on to the knowledge that she was capable, that she was something more than the role Shabana tried to force on her. But here is where the story takes its turn. Because as Aisha grew older, she did not become bitter in the way one might expect. She did not explode in anger or rebel in loud, dramatic ways. Instead, her silence became sharper, more focused. She had learned patience from years of enduring. She had learned to watch without being noticed. And slowly, somewhere deep inside, a quiet decision began to take shape. She would never forgive Shabana for what she had done. But her revenge would not come in the form of screaming or confrontation. It would come in a way that Shabana would never see coming. For now, though, that was only a seed. At 16, Aisha was still under her father's roof, still under Shabana's watchful eyes. But the seed was there, and like all seeds given enough time, it would grow. It is important to understand the atmosphere of those years. Shabana's control over the house grew stronger with time. She handled the money, decided how it was spent, and carefully ensured that Aisha received as little as possible. When it came time to buy clothes, she would pick the cheapest, plainest outfits for her, while spending generously on herself. When guests visited, she paraded herself as the perfect stepmother, often saying things like, "It is not easy raising a child who is not your own, but I do my best." And guests, of course, would nod and praise her sacrifice. Aisha learned to listen to these lies without showing anything on her face. That was one of the first skills she mastered, the mask. Just as Shabana had a mask for her father, Aisha developed one for the world. Behind it, she stored her anger, her humiliation, her longing for her mother. Outwardly, she seemed quiet, studious, obedient. Inwardly, she was becoming something else entirely. And so, the stage of her life was set. A cruel stepmother, a silent daughter, and a father too blind, or perhaps too weary, to see what was unfolding right in front of him. What none of them realized was that the girl they underestimated, the one they believed they had silenced, was quietly writing her own story. A story that would, in time, turn into the calmest, yet most devastating revenge. When Aisha turned 17, life outside her home began to offer her glimpses of freedom. School was ending and college lay ahead. For most children, this transition is exciting, filled with plans for the future. For Aisha, it was both a hope and a burden. She dreamed of independence, of stepping outside the walls that confined her. But she also knew that every decision she made would pass through Shabana's filter. Because her father, though kind in his own way, had long ago surrendered all household decisions to his second wife. The years had taught Aisha to calculate carefully. She knew when to remain quiet, when to speak, and when to simply nod in agreement, even if she intended to do otherwise. This skill, so quietly honed, would become her most powerful weapon. For now, though, she needed to play her role well. Shabana expected obedience, expected gratitude even, for the food and shelter she provided, so Aisha gave her exactly what she wanted to see: a subdued, unthreatening girl who seemed too timid to resist. Inwardly, though, her thoughts were sharper. She had learned not to share them with anyone, not even with school friends. They knew her as the quiet girl who always studied, who rarely joined in noisy jokes or gossip. But what they didn't know was that behind her silence was a mind that never stopped turning over plans. Her father still worked long hours, and his presence in the house remained distant. By now, he had become almost fully dependent on Shabana for running the home. If there were financial matters to decide, Shabana was the one who advised him. If there were relatives to deal with, she was the one who spoke on behalf of the family. In public, this gave her an image of strength and competence. Privately, it gave her control. But control is addictive, and like all addictive things, it makes one careless over time. By the time Aisha entered college, Shabana had grown complacent. She no longer felt the need to keep up the same careful balance she once had. Perhaps she believed that Aisha, now a young woman, was too conditioned to ever rebel. She was stricter, more openly dismissive, sometimes even insulting in front of the father. Imran, either unwilling or unable to challenge her, stayed silent. That silence cut Aisha more deeply than any insult. She had once believed her father would protect her. By now, she knew he never would. And yet, she did not allow bitterness to consume her. Instead, she let it sharpen her focus. She knew she needed to be patient. She was still in her father's home, still dependent on Shabana's choices. Revenge, if it was to come, had to be carefully prepared, like a slow-burning fire. At college, Aisha finally found a space where she could breathe. She buried herself in books, excelling in her studies. She chose subjects that gave her strength: economics, literature, philosophy, fields that opened her mind and taught her how people and systems worked. Knowledge was her refuge, but it was also her preparation. Every lecture, every book she read, felt like a tool she was collecting for a future she had not yet fully defined. One of her professors noticed her talent and encouraged her to apply for scholarships. At first, Aisha hesitated. She knew that at home, Shabana would never support such ambitions. But the professor's encouragement stirred something inside her, a belief that she did not need anyone's approval to build her future. Quietly, without mentioning much at home, she began applying for opportunities. When acceptance letters and offers of financial aid began arriving, she felt for the first time that she had options. Shabana noticed, of course. She noticed the glow in Aisha's eyes when she came home from college, the way she held on to her books like they were treasures. And it unsettled her. The cruelty became sharper, more desperate. Whenever Aisha tried to share something about her studies, Shabana would cut her off. "You think this will make you special? Degrees don't make anyone better. Don't fly too high or you'll fall harder." But instead of discouraging her, these words hardened Aisha's resolve. She learned something important. Her stepmother's cruelty was not just about power, it was about fear. Shabana feared losing control, feared being outshone by the very girl she had tried to silence. That fear gave Aisha a quiet sense of power, one she held close but never displayed. Years went on this way. By the time Aisha graduated with distinction, she was no longer the fragile girl who had tiptoed around the house in fear. She was calm, composed, and far more self-assured than she allowed anyone to see. In front of Shabana, she remained quiet, respectful, even submissive. But inside, she was preparing. Her father attended her graduation, sitting stiffly in the crowd. Shabana came too, dressed in her finest clothes, smiling at acquaintances as though she were the proud mother of the successful daughter. Aisha did not expose her. She simply walked onto the stage, collected her medal, and let the applause wash over her. That moment standing in the spotlight was hers. But she didn't waste it on immediate satisfaction. She was thinking ahead, because she knew her revenge was not going to be about a single confrontation or a dramatic outburst. It was going to be something far more lasting, a dismantling of everything her stepmother valued most. What did Shabana value? Control, reputation, money, status. These were the pillars on which she stood. To hurt her deeply, one had to quietly weaken those pillars, one by one, until she was left exposed, unsupported. Aisha, through years of careful observation, knew this better than anyone. The first step was independence. If she remained under Shabana's roof, she would never be free enough to act. And so, when she received a scholarship for a master's program abroad, she knew this was her chance. She presented it to her father cautiously, choosing a time when he was tired, when Shabana was not around. Imran hesitated, but when he saw that the financial burden was minimal because of the scholarship, he gave a reluctant nod. When Shabana found out, she raged. Why does she need to go abroad? Isn't studying here enough? Who will look after her there? But Aisha had anticipated this. She responded with calmness, saying she understood the concern, that she only wanted to bring honor to the family, that it would cost them nothing. Her father, unwilling to fight, told Shabana to let it go. For the first time in her life, Aisha packed her bags and left that suffocating house, not as a defeated child, but as a woman carrying her own path. Life abroad was hard at first. She was alone, unfamiliar with the culture, and constantly aware of her limited resources. But she was used to loneliness. It had been her companion since childhood. What others might have found unbearable, she endured with quiet strength. And with every challenge she overcame, she grew stronger. She worked part-time jobs, managed her studies, and built connections with professors and fellow students. Slowly, she began to carve a name for herself. All this time, she did not cut ties with her family. That was important. She called her father regularly, spoke to him with affection, and even sent polite greetings to Shabana. On the surface, she maintained the image of the dutiful daughter. This kept suspicion away. Shabana may have disliked her, but she could not openly accuse her of neglecting family duty. But behind that mask, Aisha was quietly weaving her plan. Over the years, she kept close track of the household back home. Through relatives and occasional visits, she observed how Shabana was running things. She noticed that Shabana had developed a taste for luxury, expensive clothes, jewelry, social gatherings. She was using her position as Imran's wife to present herself as a woman of standing. But this came at a cost. Imran's modest income could not fully support it. Shabana had begun to manipulate relatives for loans, make excuses, and even pressure Imran into stretching beyond his means. For Aisha, this was the crack she had been waiting for. By the time she finished her master's degree and began working in a reputable firm abroad, she was no longer financially dependent on anyone. She could now step onto the stage of her plan with confidence. Her revenge, long in the making, was not about loud retaliation. It was about letting her stepmother's own weaknesses destroy her, while Aisha simply removed the masks one by one. She began with small, deliberate acts. She started sending money directly to her father, bypassing Shabana, but always in ways that made it seem thoughtful and innocent. She would say, "Wait, Abu, I know things are expensive now. Please keep this for yourself." Shabana hated it, because it weakened her control over the household finances. But she could not openly oppose it, not without revealing her greed. Aisha also began reconnecting with relatives, presenting herself as successful yet humble. She made sure they knew she had done everything through hard work, without demanding anything from the family. Slowly, their admiration for her grew. And with every word of praise they spoke about her, Shabana's false image of being the sacrificing stepmother began to crack. Still, Aisha did not rush. She was patient. She had spent too many years waiting to let impatience ruin her now. Instead, she let her stepmother's own choices push her toward downfall, and downfall was coming. When Aisha entered her late 20s, she was no longer the timid girl who had been silenced inside her father's house. She was now a woman with a stable career, respected in her field, and able to support herself fully. On the surface, her life was everything her stepmother, Shabana, had tried to prevent. Independent, accomplished, admired. But Aisha never displayed arrogance. She knew that her greatest strength had always been her ability to stay composed, to appear modest, to hide her sharpest thoughts behind a calm face. From abroad, she stayed in touch with her father. Their relationship was tender but strained, shaped by years of his silence in the face of Shabana's cruelty. Aisha did not hold long grudges against him, yet she never forgot how easily he had looked away. Still, she wanted him safe. She wanted him protected from the storm that was slowly brewing around his wife. Because by now, Shabana's mask was beginning to slip. Shabana had always valued appearances. Her world revolved around the approval of others. She loved to host gatherings, dress in fine clothes, and boast about her place in the community. But maintaining such an image required money, and money was not something Imran earned in abundance. Over the years, the difference between what came in and what Shabana spent had widened. She borrowed quietly from relatives, often convincing them it was temporary. She even manipulated Imran into signing small loans in his name, assuring him it was manageable. But debts do not remain invisible forever. Whispers began to spread. Relatives who had once admired her started to question why she always asked for more. Neighbors noticed her extravagance despite Imran's modest job. Shabana tried to silence the rumors by pointing to Aisha's success. "Our daughter is abroad now, working in a big company. Soon she will send plenty of money. We are not struggling." Those words reached Aisha through the same network of relatives Shabana had underestimated. And hearing them, Aisha felt a quiet satisfaction, because she knew her stepmother was weaving a rope for herself, strand by strand with her own lies. All Aisha had to do was hold the other end steady and wait. Her first decisive step came when she returned home for a visit after nearly 5 years abroad. She had informed her father in advance, but not given much detail. Shabana had expected her to return timid, grateful, and perhaps eager to please. Instead, what walked into the house was a woman calm and confident, dressed simply but carrying an aura of quiet strength. The first evening was telling. Relatives came to visit, curious to meet the successful daughter. Aisha spoke warmly, asked about their lives, and listened with genuine attention. She never boasted, but people could see her composure, her independence. They began to admire her openly, praising her achievements. And with every word of praise, Shabana's forced smile tightened a little more. But Aisha did not confront her directly. That was never her style. Her revenge was not about shouting accusations. It was about letting truth shine so brightly that lies could no longer survive beside it. During that visit, Aisha began quietly setting things in motion. She asked her father gently about the household finances. At first, he brushed off the questions, saying Shabana handled everything. But when she pressed, he revealed small fragments of unease. Loans taken, bills delayed, money that seemed to vanish. He did not accuse his wife directly, but his tone carried fatigue. Aisha listened without judgment. She did not rush to say, "I told you so." Instead, she said, "Abu, let me help. Let me take some of the burden." And she began transferring money into his personal account, bypassing Shabana entirely. She told him gently, "This is for your peace of mind. Please keep it safe." He was hesitant at first, but her calm insistence reassured him. Shabana noticed quickly. She saw her grip on the finances slipping, and it rattled her. She tried to reassert control, suggesting expenses that would drain the funds. But Aisha, in her calm manner, began offering alternatives. "Why don't we do something simpler? We don't need to spend so much." To the relatives, this made her appear practical and thoughtful, while Shabana began to look reckless. The second step of her plan was reputation. Shabana had long thrived on the narrative that she had sacrificed her life to raise her stepdaughter. It was her badge of honor in front of others, but Aisha quietly dismantled that story. She never directly denied it, but whenever relatives praised Shabana for raising her well, Aisha would smile gently and say, "I'm grateful to my late mother, who gave me such a strong foundation, and to my teachers who guided me." She never lied. She simply shifted the credit away. Each time she did this, a piece of Shabana's carefully built image crumbled. Relatives began to wonder, had they misunderstood all along? Was Shabana really the devoted stepmother she claimed to be, or had she been exaggerating her role for sympathy? By the time Aisha returned abroad after her visit, the seeds had been planted. Shabana's image was tarnished, her financial control weakened, her confidence shaken, and Aisha had done it all without a single direct confrontation. But her plan was not complete. Revenge in her mind was not about one victory. It was about dismantling the very pillars on which her stepmother stood: control, reputation, and pride, until nothing remained. From abroad, she continued her work patiently. She sent money only into her father's account. She stayed in touch with relatives, always humble, always respectful. When they praised her, she redirected the admiration toward her late mother's memory. And slowly, a narrative formed in the community. Aisha had succeeded through her own resilience, not because of Shabana. Meanwhile, Shabana's debts grew heavier. With her access to funds restricted, she became desperate. She began pressing relatives more aggressively for loans, sometimes even hinting that Aisha would repay them. But when those relatives discreetly checked with Aisha, she calmly explained, "I haven't asked anyone for money. Please don't give on my behalf." That simple truth exposed Shabana's manipulations. Relatives grew wary of her. Neighbors whispered more openly. Imran, once passive, began noticing the patterns he had long ignored. And with each realization, his trust in Shabana weakened. The breaking point came during a family gathering. A distant uncle, tired of Shabana's constant boasting, remarked aloud, "You always say you raised Aisha like your own, but I've never once heard her say so herself. Maybe she succeeded in spite of you, not because of you." The room fell silent. Shabana's face turned pale. Aisha, sitting quietly nearby, did not argue or defend. She simply smiled politely and changed the subject. That silence spoke louder than any accusation. It confirmed what everyone had long suspected but never dared say. From that day, Shabana's reputation unraveled quickly. Relatives stopped lending her money, friends withdrew, invitations to gatherings grew fewer. Without the constant flow of admiration and validation, she became restless, angry, and bitter. At home, her power slipped further. Imran, tired of the financial strain, began relying more on Aisha for guidance. He started setting aside money in savings accounts under her advice, effectively cutting Shabana out of the decision-making. For a woman who had built her identity on control, this loss was unbearable. And yet, Aisha never raised her voice. She never accused her stepmother directly. She remained calm, polite, respectful on the surface. That was the essence of her revenge. Silence sharper than any scream. She let the truth, revealed slowly over years, become the weapon that destroyed her stepmother's illusions. By the time Aisha was in her 30s, Shabana had become a shadow of the woman she once was. Her debts haunted her, her reputation was broken, and her influence over the household was gone. Relatives spoke of her with pity, sometimes even with contempt. Imran, though still married to her, no longer looked to her for guidance. He leaned on his daughter instead, the very daughter Shabana had tried to suppress. And what of Aisha? She did not gloat. She did not announce victory. She simply lived her life with dignity, supporting her father, visiting home when she could, and maintaining her calm composure. That, perhaps, was the greatest revenge of all, that the girl who had once been silenced grew into a woman whose very presence silenced the stepmother. For Shabana, the punishment was not a single dramatic downfall. It was the slow, unrelenting realization that everything she had valued, control, status, pride, had slipped away, not through force, but through the quiet strength of the very girl she had underestimated. Aisha's revenge was not fire and fury. It was calm, steady, and inevitable. It was the kind of revenge that left no room for denial, because it was delivered not by anger, but by truth. And in the end, when people in the community spoke of the family, they no longer spoke of Shabana the stepmother. They spoke of Aisha, the quiet, resilient daughter who had carried herself with grace, who had succeeded without cruelty, who had let patience itself become her weapon. That is how her silent revenge was completed. If you enjoyed this story of calm, patient revenge, I invite you to support the channel. Please like this video, share it with others who might appreciate it, and subscribe for more stories where silence, patience, and resilience become the most powerful form of justice.